Chapter 1. The Castle on the Hill. The winter of 1944 was the coldest anyone at Colditz could remember. Snow lay thick upon the castle roofs. It gathered along the high walls, filled the narrow courtyards, and softened the sharp edges of the stone until the whole fortress seemed less like a prison and more like some ancient thing frozen in a dream. By day, the castle stood pale and silent above the town, its towers watching the valley below. By night, it became something darker. Searchlights moved across the snow. Guards paced beneath heavy coats. Iron gates groaned in the wind. Somewhere beyond the walls, dogs barked into the blackness. For the prisoners inside, winter made escape both impossible and tempting. Impossible because every footprint showed. Every breath steamed in the air. Every loose stone, every unlocked door, every careless movement seemed louder in the cold. Tempting because the guards were tired. The war was going badly for Germany now, and everyone knew it. News arrived slowly, hidden in letters, whispered through walls, passed from man to man like contraband. The Allies had landed in France. The Russians were advancing in the east. Cities were burning. Trains ran late. Supplies were short. Even the guards at Colditz no longer marched with quite the same certainty. Captain James Ashford noticed such things. He noticed everything. He noticed when a sentry's boots were cracked. He noticed when a guard lingered too long near the stove. He noticed which searchlight stuck for half a second when turning over the north wall. He noticed that the delivery lorry bringing coal to the lower gate had changed its route 3 times in the past month. And he noticed, most importantly of all, that the Germans were beginning to look afraid. Ashford was 32 years old, though imprisonment had made him look older. He had once been a schoolmaster in Kent, a quiet man with tidy handwriting and a fondness for maps. Then the war came, and with it France, retreat, capture, interrogation, and finally Colditz, the castle reserved for officers who had already tried to escape from everywhere else. That was the joke among the prisoners. Colditz was not a prison for men who obeyed rules. It was a prison for men who had become inconvenient. Ashford stood that evening beside the narrow window of his room, watching snow fall into the courtyard below. The bars were cold enough to burn his fingers. Beyond them, a German guard crossed the white ground slowly, rifle slung over one shoulder, his breath rising in clouds. Behind Ashford, someone coughed. "You'll freeze your nose off if you keep standing there." Ashford turned. Lieutenant Peter Mallory lay on the lower bunk, wrapped in 2 blankets and still shivering. He was younger than Ashford by nearly 10 years, fair-haired, sharp-faced, and incapable of remaining serious for more than a minute unless danger was immediate. "I'm admiring the view," Ashford said. Mallory snorted. Stone wall, snow, guard, more stone wall, very moving. "There are worse views." "Name one." "The inside of a punishment cell." Mallory considered this. "Fair." The room was small, overcrowded, and badly heated. 6 men slept there. Their belongings were packed into corners, hidden under straw mattresses, or tucked behind loose stones. A few books sat on a shelf made from scrap wood. A chessboard stood unfinished on a crate. Damp socks hung near the stove, which had not been lit properly for 2 days. A castle might look romantic from the outside. From the inside, as a prisoner in winter, it was mostly cold stone, thin soup, and waiting. Ashford stepped away from the window. "What time is it?" Mallory looked at the watch he had repaired 3 times since arriving. Nearly 8. Ashford nodded. Then he'll come soon. Mallory sat up slightly. You think he found something? I think he wouldn't risk coming if he hadn't. The he in question was Major Edward Pembroke, known throughout the British quarters as the Professor. He had never held a university post, nor, so far as anyone knew, taught anything more academic than fieldcraft to young officers in North Africa. But he had a calm, scholarly manner, a pair of round spectacles, and the habit of explaining dangerous plans as though giving a lecture on Roman roads. If anyone in Colditz could turn a mad idea into a practical escape attempt, it was Pembroke. At 8:03, there came a soft knock at the door. Not a normal knock. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. Mallory rose at once and moved to the door. He waited, listening. Then he opened it only a few inches. Pembroke slipped inside. He carried a book under one arm and wore the expression of a man who had discovered something interesting and unwelcome. Behind him came Sergeant Tom Willis, though officially he should not have been there at all. As an orderly, Willis moved through parts of the castle unavailable to the officers. He cleaned, carried, fetched, listened, and generally made himself invisible. He had a broad face, powerful hands, and the patient silence of a man who had learned the value of being underestimated. Mallory closed the door. Ashford lowered his voice. Well, Pembroke placed the book on the crate beside the chessboard. It was not really a book. The inside had been cut out and filled with folded paper. He removed a rough map. Freight line, he said. Ashford leaned closer. Pembroke tapped a point southwest of the castle. Here, small rail yard, mostly goods traffic, coal, timber, military supplies when they can manage it. The line runs west, then north, then eventually joins a larger route. Mallory stared at the map. How far? 6 miles, perhaps 7, depending on the path. In this snow? Yes. Mallory smiled thinly. Lovely stroll. Ashford ignored him. Destination. Pembroke adjusted his spectacles. That is the difficulty. We cannot rely on the train taking us all the way to friendly territory. Not directly. But railway movement is chaotic now. If we can get aboard undetected, we may reach a junction. From there, another train. Or the forests. That's not a plan, Mallory said. That's an argument with fate. Pembroke looked at him mildly. Most escapes are. Willis spoke for the first time. There's another thing. All 3 officers turned. Willis pulled a folded scrap from inside his sleeve. Coal delivery tomorrow. Same lorry as last week. Comes through the lower service gate before dawn. They unload near the storage arch. Ashford took the paper. And they've been careless with the inner gate. Not always locked while the men carry sacks. Pembroke's eyes sharpened. How long? 2 minutes, maybe 3. Mallory whistled softly. That's generous of them. Not generous, Willis said. Cold. No one spoke for a moment. Cold made men careless. Cold made guards hurry. Cold made routines fray at the edges. Ashford looked back at the map. The lower service gate, the delivery arch, the outer road, the woods beyond the town, 6 miles to the rail yard, a freight train leaving before dawn. It was barely a plan. It was also the best chance they had seen in months. Pembroke folded his hands. There is a train due 2 nights from now. According to the timetable Willis overheard, it leaves shortly after 4 in the morning. Freight only. Likely slow, likely poorly guarded. Likely, Mallory said. Pembroke gave him a dry look. I regret that the German railway authorities declined to provide full details. Ashford studied the map a little longer. How many can go? Pembroke's expression changed. There it was, the hard part. 4 at most. The room seemed to grow quieter. 4. In Colditz, every escape plan began with hope and ended with arithmetic. How many uniforms? How many forged papers? How much food? How many men could move silently? How many could hide? How many could survive if things went wrong? Mallory looked away. Willis stared at the floor. Ashford knew what each man was thinking. Every prisoner in the castle wanted out. Every man had dreamed of reaching home. Every man had imagined appearing suddenly at a farmhouse door in Switzerland, or walking into an Allied line, or sending word to a wife, a mother, a brother, saying the impossible had happened. I am free. But escape attempts were cruel. They chose some men and left others behind. Pembroke spoke quietly. We have clothes for 3 officers and 1 worker, civilian coats, papers good enough for a glance in poor light, not good enough for questioning, food for 2 days, a little money, a compass, no weapons. No weapons? Mallory asked. No weapons, Ashford said, before Pembroke could answer. Mallory glanced at him. Ashford's face was calm. If we carry weapons and are caught, everything becomes worse. For us and for everyone left here. Mallory nodded slowly. He knew that. They all did. The wind pressed against the window. Far below, a guard shouted something in German. Another answered. A gate clanged shut. Pembroke folded the map again. I will go, he said. No, Ashford replied. The Major looked up. I beg your pardon. You're too valuable here. James, you organize half the escape work in this castle. If this fails, we need you still inside. Pembroke's mouth tightened. And you? Ashford looked toward the window. I've been watching the lower gate for 6 weeks. That does not make you expendable. No, Ashford said, but it does make me useful. The argument might have continued, but Willis interrupted. I go. There was no drama in the way he said it, no performance, just a statement. Mallory looked at him. You're certain? Willis shrugged. I'm the only one who knows the service route properly, and I can pass as a labourer if I keep my mouth shut. That may be the easiest role anyone has ever assigned you, Mallory said. Willis almost smiled. Pembroke sighed. Very well, Ashford, Willis, Mallory. Mallory blinked. Me? You speak better German than most. I speak terrible German. Confidently terrible German, Pembroke said. Often that is enough. And the 4th? Silence settled again. Ashford already knew who it would be. Carter, he said. Mallory's expression softened. Yes. Flight Lieutenant Daniel Carter had arrived at Colditz after being shot down over the Netherlands. He was quiet, steady, and thin from months of imprisonment. He had tried to escape twice before. Once through a laundry cart. Once over a roof during a storm. Both attempts had failed. Both had been brave. More importantly, both had shown he could keep his head when a plan collapsed. Pembroke nodded. I'll speak to him. No, Ashford said. I will. The meeting ended quickly after that. In Colditz, secrecy was survival. Men could be trusted, but walls could not. Doors could not. Even silence sometimes seemed unsafe. Pembroke returned the papers to the hollow book. Willis listened at the door before leaving. Mallory sat back on the bunk and exhaled slowly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that should make for a bracing evening." Ashford did not answer. He had returned to the window. The courtyard below was almost empty now. Snow continued to fall, covering footprints almost as soon as they were made. The searchlight swept across the far wall, paused for half a second where the mechanism stuck, then moved on. Half a second. Such small things mattered. A life could pass through half a second. A man could vanish in half a second, or die in it. Later that night, after lights out, Ashford lay awake beneath his blanket and listened to the castle breathe. Old buildings had their own sounds. Stone contracting in the cold, pipes knocking, wood creaking, wind whirring at shutters, footsteps in distant corridors, the cough of a prisoner, the bark of a dog, a guard's boots passing below the window. He had heard these sounds for so long that he knew them almost as one knows a piece of music. But tonight they seemed sharper, more meaningful. Every sound might matter soon. Every routine might save or destroy them. On the bunk above, Mallory whispered into the darkness, "You awake?" "Yes." "Do you think it'll work?" Ashford stared up at the wooden slats above him. "No." Mallory was silent for a moment. Then he gave a soft laugh. "Comforting. I think parts of it will work." "Which parts?" "Not sure yet." "That's even worse." Ashford smiled faintly in the dark. Beyond the window, the wind moved across the castle walls. Somewhere outside, beyond the town, beyond the frozen road and the black line of trees, a railway waited beneath the snow. A freight train would arrive there in 2 nights. Coal wagons, timber trucks, perhaps a tarpaulin-covered carriage, perhaps a brake van with one sleepy guard and a stove, perhaps nothing useful at all. But it would be moving west, and in Colditz, movement meant possibility. Ashford closed his eyes. For months, his world had been stone walls, locked doors, barred windows, and routines designed to crush hope by making each day resemble the last. Now the days had changed. There were only 2 left. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to memorize every step. 2 days before the lower service gate opened in the winter dark. 2 days before 4 men would step into the snow and attempt to disappear. Outside, the searchlight passed once more across the courtyard. For half a second, it caught. Then it moved on, and the castle returned to darkness. Chapter 2. The Plan. The next morning dawned grey and bitterly cold. Not that dawn could truly be seen from inside Colditz. The castle woke gradually through sound rather than light. Doors opened. Boots echoed along stone corridors. Guards called to one another in German. Somewhere below, a kitchen worker dropped a metal pot, producing a crash loud enough to wake half the building. Captain James Ashford had been awake for nearly an hour. Sleep had come only in fragments. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself replaying the plan. The lower service gate, the coal delivery, the frozen road, the forest, the rail yard, the freight train. Then the same question returned. What have we forgotten? Every escape depended upon details. And every failed escape was usually the result of a detail nobody had considered. A loose floorboard, a missing key, an unexpected sentry, a barking dog, a train arriving 10 minutes early, a train arriving 10 minutes late. History was full of grand plans destroyed by small inconveniences. The bell rang. Breakfast. The prisoners filed into the mess hall. Breakfast at Colditz was rarely memorable. Weak coffee, dark bread, occasionally something resembling porridge. The food existed primarily to remind everyone that better food existed elsewhere. Ashford sat beside Mallory. Across from them, Flight Lieutenant Daniel Carter quietly ate his bread while studying the room. He had received the news late the previous evening. Like most experienced prisoners, he had not celebrated. He had simply nodded, then spent the rest of the night staring thoughtfully at a wall. "How are you feeling?" Mallory asked him. Carter took a sip of coffee. "Cold." "That's sensible." "And nervous." "Less sensible." Carter smiled faintly. "Nervous men stay alive." "Sometimes." "No," Carter replied. "Confident men end up back in solitary." That observation earned a laugh from Ashford. There was truth in it. Most prisoners who repeatedly escaped possessed a strange mixture of courage and pessimism. They assumed everything would go wrong and prepared accordingly. Hope alone was dangerous. Preparation mattered more. Across the room, a German guard entered carrying a clipboard. Conversation immediately quietened, not because anyone feared him particularly, but because habit demanded caution. The guard walked slowly through the hall, checking numbers, watching faces, performing the daily count. Ashford observed him casually. The man looked exhausted. His uniform hung loosely. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. Twice he rubbed one hand as though suffering from arthritis. Another detail. The guards were tired. Everyone was tired. The war was dragging toward its conclusion. And somewhere beyond the walls, Germany was losing. The prisoners knew it. The guards knew it. Neither side spoke of it openly, yet the knowledge lingered in every corridor. After breakfast, life resumed its normal routine, at least on the surface. The genius of Colditz escapes was often their ordinariness. Men preparing to flee one of the most secure prisons in Europe spent much of their day pretending absolutely nothing unusual was happening. Ashford attended a language lesson. Mallory played chess. Carter repaired a pair of boots. Willis carried supplies between storage rooms. All entirely normal, all entirely necessary. Meanwhile, preparations continued quietly. That afternoon, Ashford visited one of the castle's oldest towers. Officially, he was taking exercise. Unofficially, he was conducting reconnaissance. The tower offered a view of the lower service yard. Not a perfect view, but good enough. He stood near a narrow window and watched. Snow covered everything. The yard, the walls, the roofs, even the guard posts. The lower gate stood approximately 200 yards away. Heavy, iron-bound, usually locked. The coal lorry arrived shortly after 3 o'clock, right on schedule. Ashford immediately focused his attention. 2 guards opened the gate. The vehicle entered. Several labourers climbed down. Sacks and crates began moving toward the storage arch. Ashford timed everything. The unloading process, the movements of the guards, the opening and closing of doors, the changing of positions. Minutes passed. Then he saw it, exactly as Willis had described. The inner gate remained unattended. Not long. Perhaps 90 seconds. Perhaps 2 minutes. But it happened. The opportunity existed. Ashford continued watching until the lorry departed. Then he repeated the entire sequence from memory. Twice, 3 times. By the time he left the tower, he could visualize every movement, every guard, every delay, every possibility. The margin for error remained tiny, yet it existed, and sometimes that was enough. That evening, the 4 escapees met in a disused storage room beneath the western wing. The room had once housed cleaning supplies. Now it served more interesting purposes. Pembroke was already waiting when they arrived. Several items lay spread across a table. Civilian clothes, forged documents, maps, a compass, a small amount of German currency, and a packet of chocolate. Mallory stared at the chocolate. "We have chocolate." Pembroke looked annoyed. "That is your main observation." "It is excellent news." The Major sighed. "1 ration each." Mallory picked up the packet reverently. Heroes are made from such luxuries. The forged documents came next. Each man received a different identity: factory workers, railway labourers, civilian employees. Nothing glamorous, nothing memorable. That was the point. A memorable identity invited questions. A forgettable one encouraged people to look elsewhere. Carter studied his papers carefully. What if they actually asked questions? Pembroke adjusted his spectacles, then answered confidently. In German? Preferably. What if my German is terrible? Mallory leaned forward, then answered confidently in terrible German. Even Carter laughed. For a moment the tension eased. Only for a moment. Eventually the clothes emerged. Worn jackets, heavy coats, workmen's caps, all painstakingly assembled from stolen materials, altered garments, and months of secret effort. To outsiders they looked unimpressive. To the prisoners they represented freedom. Ashford held one coat up to the light. It smelled faintly of machine oil. Perfect. No officer would willingly wear it, which was precisely why it would help him escape. The final briefing lasted almost 2 hours. Routes were reviewed repeatedly, landmarks memorized, contingencies discussed. If separated, head west. If challenged, remain calm. If captured, reveal nothing. If one man falls behind, the others continue. That final instruction produced silence. Nobody liked it. Nobody argued, because they all understood. One hesitation could doom everyone. The meeting ended shortly before midnight. As the others departed, Pembroke stopped Ashford. "James." Ashford turned. The Major hesitated, an unusual thing for him. "What is it?" Pembroke folded his arms. "If something feels wrong, abort." Ashford raised an eyebrow. "You spent 6 months planning this." "Precisely. And now you're telling me not to do it?" "I'm telling you not to let pride make the decision." Ashford smiled faintly. "Sound advice. Promise me." The captain looked at him for several moments, then nodded. "I promise." Yet as he returned to his room later that night, he already suspected the truth. Very few escape attempts ever felt entirely right. Fear had a way of disguising itself as caution. At some point, a man simply had to move, or remain a prisoner forever. The following day passed slowly, painfully slowly. Time behaved differently when freedom waited just ahead. Every hour seemed longer, every routine more tedious, every guard more irritating. By evening, the entire castle appeared frozen beneath a fresh blanket of snow. The weather had worsened. Wind swept across the walls. ice-covered stairways. Even the guards looked miserable, a promising sign. Ashford spent the final night preparing his few possessions. Most would remain behind. A blanket, a book, a tin mug, a photograph of his parents. The photograph troubled him. For several minutes he sat looking at it. His father stood proudly beside a garden gate. His mother smiled at the camera. Both seemed impossibly distant, as though belonging to another life. Eventually, he placed the photograph inside his coat. One luxury, one unnecessary item, one reminder of why he was leaving. Later, after lights out, nobody slept. Not really. Mallory lay awake above him. Carter stared at the ceiling. Even the prisoners uninvolved in the escape seemed unusually quiet. Word had not spread. It never did. Yet somehow men often sense such things. The atmosphere felt different, expectant. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, Ashford finally rose. No alarm sounded. No dramatic signal arrived. Simply a quiet moment when preparation became action. He dressed carefully. Civilian clothes, heavy coat, forged papers, compass, food, money. Everything checked twice, then checked again. The others were already waiting. No speeches were made, no grand farewells exchanged. The castle was full of men who understood the risks. Too many goodbyes invited bad luck. At the doorway, Ashford paused briefly. He looked back at the room, the bunks, the stove, the window, the walls. For years this had been his world, perhaps forever, or perhaps only for a few more hours. He honestly did not know. Then Mallory touched his shoulder. "Ready?" Ashford nodded. Together, the 4 men stepped into the darkness of the corridor. Far below, somewhere beyond countless walls and locked doors, the lower service gate waited. And beyond that gate lay snow, forest, danger, the freight train, and freedom, if they could reach it. The castle clock began striking 3. Each slow bell echoed through the sleeping fortress. 1, 2, 3. The escape had begun. Chapter 3, Through the Snow. The castle clock had only just finished striking 3 when the 4 men reached the lower levels. Every sound seemed unnaturally loud. The scrape of a boot, the creak of old wood, the rustle of clothing. Even breathing felt dangerous. The corridors of Colditz were never truly silent. Ancient stone had a way of carrying noise from impossible distances. Somewhere far above, a door closed. A guard coughed. Water dripped steadily through old pipes hidden within the walls. The sounds seemed amplified by tension. Ashford led the way. Willis followed close behind. Mallory and Carter brought up the rear. All 4 wore civilian clothing now. Heavy coats, workmen's caps, scarves pulled high against the cold. In poor light they looked convincing enough. In good light, perhaps less so. The key was ensuring nobody had an opportunity for a good look. The lower service corridor stretched ahead of them, dimly lit, narrow, cold. Their route had been rehearsed countless times. Not physically. That would have been impossible, but mentally. Every turn memorized, every doorway studied, every potential obstacle discussed repeatedly. Now came the difficult part, reality. At the end of the corridor, Willis raised a hand. The others stopped immediately. A faint glow spilled across the stone floor from around a corner. Voices, German voices. 2 guards. The men exchanged glances. Willis crept forward alone, slowly, carefully. The others waited. Seconds stretched. Then Willis returned. Still talking. "What about?" Mallory whispered. Willis shrugged. "Sounded like football." Ashford almost laughed. Somehow the idea felt absurd. The guards discussing football while 4 prisoners prepared to escape. Yet perhaps that was exactly why the plan might work. To the guards, this was another freezing winter night. To the prisoners, it was the most important night of their lives. The difference mattered. The voices eventually faded. A door opened, closed. Silence returned. Willis nodded. They moved again. A staircase descended ahead. The final staircase. Beyond it lay the service yard, the coal delivery, the gate. Ashford felt his heartbeat quicken. Not panic, not fear. Something sharper. The sensation that comes when months of preparation finally collide with reality. The 4 men descended. 1 step, then another, then another. At the bottom they stopped. The service arch lay ahead. Snow blew through the open entrance. The cold struck them immediately. Brutal, sharp, alive. For a moment, Ashford simply stared. He had not stood outside the castle walls in years. The sight almost seemed unreal. The coal lorry had arrived. Exactly as expected. Workers unloaded sacks beneath lantern light. The guards appeared bored, half frozen, distracted. One smoked a cigarette. The other stamped his feet constantly in an effort to stay warm. Willis checked the yard, then nodded. Now. The 4 men stepped forward. No running, no crouching, no suspicious behavior. Just 4 workers moving with purpose. The hardest part of any disguise was resisting the urge to behave like a man in disguise. Ashford kept walking. The guards barely glanced at them. One muttered something. Willis answered in German. The guard grunted, looked away, and that was all. Months of planning, years of imprisonment, reduced to a few seconds of casual indifference. The 4 men crossed the yard. The inner gate stood open, unattended, exactly as Willis had predicted. Ashford resisted the urge to look around. Keep moving, keep walking, keep breathing. The outer gate stood beyond, not locked, not guarded, at least not directly. One final stretch, 20 yards, 15, 10. Then suddenly, a voice behind them, sharp, German, calling out. All 4 froze. For a single terrible second, Ashford believed everything had ended. The discovery, the arrest, the return to a cell, perhaps worse. Slowly he turned. A guard stood near the unloading crew, looking directly toward them. The man's expression seemed suspicious, alert, dangerous. Then another worker raised a hand. The guard laughed and threw him a cigarette. The conversation resumed. Nothing more. The call had never been meant for them. Ashford realized his hands were trembling. He forced himself onward. The others followed. 3 more steps. 4, 5. Then they passed through the outer gate and left Colditz. No alarm sounded. No whistles blew. No searchlight swept across the snow. The castle simply remained behind them, silent, unaware. For several moments, none of them spoke. They walked steadily down the road leading away from the fortress. The snow muffled their footsteps. The darkness swallowed them. Only when the castle had disappeared behind a rise did Mallory finally exhale. Well, no one replied. What now? Still, nobody answered. Then Willis smiled, the first genuine smile of the night. "Now," he said, "we walk." The road curved through woodland. The forest stood black and motionless beneath the snow. Moonlight filtered through bare branches. Ice glittered on every surface. The cold deepened. Within an hour, their boots were soaked. Within 2 hours, their fingers ached. Within 3 hours, every step became an effort. Yet they continued. The rail yard remained 6 miles away, perhaps more. The journey felt endless. Conversation gradually disappeared. Breath became precious. Energy became precious. Even thought seemed difficult in the freezing darkness. Only determination carried them forward. Several times they heard vehicles on distant roads. Each time they left the path and hid among the trees. Once, a military lorry passed less than 50 yards away. Its headlights swept across the snow. The 4 men remained motionless, barely breathing. The vehicle continued without slowing. Only when the sound vanished completely did they move again. Near midnight, they reached a frozen stream. The crossing proved difficult. Ice cracked beneath Carter's foot. Water flooded one boot. He cursed quietly. Mallory pulled him upright before he fell completely through. For several minutes, they stood on the far bank, stamping warmth back into their legs. Nobody enjoyed the delay, yet nobody complained. They were free men now, at least for the moment, and free men kept moving. Around 2 o'clock, they reached the edge of the forest. Beyond lay open farmland, fields stretched beneath moonlight. White, silent, endless. Far in the distance, Ashford saw something. A faint glow. Not natural. Not moonlight. Not starlight. Human. The rail yard. At last. Hope surged through the group. They pressed onward. The final miles passed slowly. Exhaustion weighed heavily now. Every muscle hurt. Every breath burned. Yet the glow grew brighter, closer, more real. Eventually, they reached a low hill overlooking the railway, and there they stopped. The sight below stole their words. The freight yard stretched across the valley floor. Tracks crisscrossed the snow. Signal lights glowed red and green through drifting mist. Dark locomotives rested beneath clouds of steam. Dozens of freight wagons waited silently in long rows. Coal cars, timber wagons, supply trains, the largest rail yard any of them had seen in months. And somewhere among those trains lay their route to freedom. Ashford lowered himself beside a snow-covered embankment. The others joined him. For several moments nobody spoke. The journey from Colditz had succeeded. Against all odds, the castle lay behind them, the walls, the guards, the cells, gone. Yet the most dangerous part remained ahead, because escaping the prison had only been the beginning. Now they had to leave Germany, and the rail yard below looked anything but welcoming. Steam drifted between the tracks. Lanterns moved in the darkness. Workers crossed from train to train. Guards patrolled the perimeter. The place was alive. Mallory stared down at it. "Tell me," he said quietly. Ashford looked across the sprawling yard. "Yes." "You do have a plan for this part?" Ashford watched a locomotive release a great cloud of steam into the frozen air. Then he smiled faintly, not remotely. The men laughed, quietly, briefly, because sometimes laughter was the only sensible response. Then they settled down to watch and wait, for somewhere below, a freight train would soon depart, and if fortune remained with them for a little longer, they intended to be aboard it. Chapter 4. The Freight Yard. For nearly an hour, the four men lay motionless upon the snowy hillside overlooking the rail yard. The cold seeped through their coats. The snow beneath them gradually melted from body heat and then froze again. Nobody complained. The rail yard below demanded their full attention. It was larger than any of them had anticipated. Tracks spread across the valley like a spider's web. Freight wagons stood in long rows disappearing into the darkness. Steam drifted constantly between locomotives, sometimes concealing entire sections of the yard before slowly revealing them again. Lanterns moved everywhere. Workers, engineers, guards, railway staff. The place seemed alive despite the hour. Ashford studied it carefully. Every movement, every routine, every pattern. Eventually, he pointed toward the western side of the yard. There. The others followed his gaze. A freight train stood on a siding near several warehouses. Its locomotive remained idle. No steam, no movement, no visible crew. "What about it?" Mallory asked. Ashford nodded toward the wagons. "Coal." Willis squinted. "Looks that way." Coal trains interested them for one simple reason. Nobody enjoyed searching coal. A train carrying military supplies might attract inspections. Passenger coaches certainly would. Coal wagons tended to receive less attention, especially during wartime, especially during winter, especially at 4 in the morning. They continued watching. The train remained still. The yard around it remained quiet. Hope grew. Then Carter spoke. Movement. Everyone turned. A locomotive had entered from the eastern side of the yard. Slowly, it rolled toward the waiting freight wagons. Steam hissed, metal clanked, lanterns bobbed through the darkness. The train was being prepared. Ashford checked his watch. 3:42. Exactly when it should have been. Their opportunity had arrived. No one spoke for several moments. They simply watched. The locomotive coupled to the freight cars. Workers moved along the length of the train performing final inspections. A guard crossed between 2 rows of wagons, then disappeared again. The train would not remain stationary much longer. They needed to move. Now. Ashford looked at the others. "Ready?" 3 heads nodded. Nobody smiled. Nobody joked. The journey from Colditz had been difficult. The next few minutes would be far worse. The 4 men rose carefully. Snow brushed from coats. Hands checked pockets. Documents secured. The hillside descended gradually toward the outer edge of the yard. No fences blocked their route. That was fortunate. Unfortunately, the open ground offered little cover. Steam became their ally. Each time a locomotive released a cloud, they moved. Each time visibility improved, they froze. Slowly, patiently, yard by yard, closer, closer. The sounds of the railway grew louder. Metal striking metal, steam escaping valves, voices calling in German, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. The smell of coal filled the air, thick, heavy, familiar. Soon, they reached a drainage ditch running alongside the tracks. They dropped into it immediately. The ditch was half frozen and unpleasant. Nobody cared. For the first time, they were inside the perimeter. The train stood less than 100 yards away, close enough to touch soon, close enough to fail. Ashford peered over the edge. A guard walked slowly between 2 rows of wagons, rifle slung over one shoulder, hands buried in pockets. He looked miserable. The cold had clearly become his greatest enemy. Good. Cold men made mistakes. The guard disappeared around a curve. Ashford raised a hand. The group moved again. Now they travelled crouched low between stationary wagons. The steel wheels towered above them. The smell of grease mixed with coal dust. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every noise sounded suspicious. Twice they froze completely as railway workers passed nearby. Once a lantern swung so close that Mallory later swore he could read the man's watch. Yet somehow they remained unseen. Fortune stayed with them. For now. At last they reached the coal train. The wagons stood open at the top, filled almost to the brim. Black mountains of coal gleamed beneath patches of snow. Ashford examined the length of the train. 30 cars, perhaps. More. The locomotive waited silently at the front. Steam beginning to rise. Departure was close. Very close. "We need one near the middle," Willis whispered. "Why?" "Less likely to be inspected." The logic was sound. The 4 men moved along the train, counting wagons, watching for movement, listening constantly. At the 12th wagon, they stopped. It appeared perfect. High coal load, deep shadows, no nearby workers. Ashford glanced around. The yard seemed clear. Then he began climbing. The coal shifted beneath his boots. Sharp edges dug into his gloves. The climb proved awkward. Eventually he reached the top and rolled into the load. The others followed, one by one. Soon all 4 lay hidden among the coal. Black dust covered everything, faces, hands, clothes. Mallory looked ridiculous, which was comforting. The situation had become so tense that absurdity felt welcome. Then a whistle sounded. The men immediately fell silent. A long, mournful blast echoed across the yard. The departure signal. Steam erupted from the locomotive. The train lurched, stopped, then lurched again. Coal shifted beneath them. Some pieces rolled away into darkness. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The train began to creep forward, slowly, painfully slowly, yet undeniably moving. Ashford felt something unexpected. Relief. Not complete relief. Not even close. But relief nonetheless. For the first time since leaving Colditz, they were travelling. Actually travelling. Every rotation of the wheels carried them further from the castle. Further from imprisonment, further from Germany's tightening grip. The freight yard gradually slipped away. Warehouses passed, signals passed, sidings passed. The locomotive gathered speed, not much, but enough. Soon the rail yard lay behind them entirely. Darkness swallowed the tracks. Snow-covered countryside emerged. Fields, forests, small villages sleeping beneath the winter sky. The train pushed onward through the night. For nearly an hour, nobody spoke. The wind became increasingly bitter as speed increased. Coal dust coated their faces. Every bump rattled their bones. Yet none of them cared. They were free, or close enough to taste it. Eventually, Mallory raised his head slightly. "Well." Ashford smiled despite himself. "Well, we actually did it." Willis shook his head. "Not yet." The words hung in the cold air. Not yet. He was right, very right, because escaping Colditz had only been the first challenge. Boarding the train had been the second. The third remained ahead, and it might prove the hardest of all. Germany was enormous. The war still raged. Roadblocks existed everywhere. Patrols travelled constantly. The freight train itself might be inspected at any time. One careless railway official, one suspicious guard, one unlucky moment. That was all it would take. As if summoned by the thought, Carter suddenly stiffened. Someone's coming. Instantly, the others flattened themselves deeper into the coal. Ashford listened. At first he heard only the train. Then another sound emerged. Footsteps, metal footsteps, moving along the tops of the wagons, coming closer. A guard. The four men exchanged horrified glances. The footsteps continued, steady, deliberate, drawing nearer with every second. One wagon away, then directly above them. Ashford barely dared breathe. Coal dust filled his nose. His heart hammered. The footsteps stopped, directly overhead. Silence followed. Long, terrible. Silence. Then came the scrape of a lantern being raised. A beam of light swept across the coal. Closer, closer. Ashford could see it moving toward them. Another second, and the train rounded a curve violently. The guard stumbled. A curse echoed through the darkness. The lantern beam vanished. Moments later, the footsteps continued away. One wagon, 2, 3, gone. Nobody moved for several seconds. Then Mallory exhaled slowly. That, he whispered, was unpleasant. No one disagreed. The train continued westward through the frozen night. Beyond the horizon, dawn remained several hours away. Ahead lay unknown tracks, unknown dangers, unknown opportunities. And somewhere far beyond the snow-covered countryside, freedom waited. If they could stay alive long enough to reach it. Chapter 5. The Last Chase. The train rolled west through the darkness. Hour after hour, the wheels clattered across frozen rails, while the countryside slipped silently past. Villages appeared and vanished. Forests emerged from the night and disappeared again. Occasionally, a distant church steeple rose above the snow before fading into darkness behind them. The four escapees remained hidden among the coal. Cold had become their constant companion. Coal dust covered every inch of exposed skin. Their hands were raw. Their faces stung. Their muscles ached from lying motionless for so long. Yet nobody complained. Every mile carried them further from Colditz. Every mile carried them closer to freedom. Dawn eventually began to creep across the eastern horizon. At first, it appeared only as a faint grey glow. Then slowly, the landscape emerged from darkness. Snow-covered fields stretched in every direction. Frozen rivers wound through valleys. Small farms sat beneath thin trails of smoke. The sight should have been beautiful. Instead, it brought new danger. Daylight meant visibility. Visibility meant discovery. Ashford watched the countryside carefully. The train maintained a steady pace, not fast, not slow, just enough to cover ground efficiently. Then, shortly after sunrise, the train began to decelerate. The change was subtle at first, then unmistakable. The locomotive's rhythm altered. The wagons jolted slightly. Speed dropped. Mallory immediately noticed. Problem. Everyone raised their heads. Ahead, smoke hung above a cluster of buildings. Tracks multiplied. Signals appeared. Another rail yard. A junction. Ashford swore quietly. A major junction was exactly the sort of place where trains were inspected. The locomotive released a long blast of steam. Brakes squealed. The train slowed further. Workers became visible beside the tracks. Guards too. Too many guards. Far more than they had seen during the night. The four men sank deeper into the coal. The train rolled into the yard and stopped. For several moments nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The sounds around them grew louder. Voices, footsteps, metal striking metal, the hiss of steam. A railway worker passed so close that Ashford could hear him coughing. Then came the sound none of them wanted to hear. Boots climbing onto the train. Inspection. The footsteps moved from wagon to wagon. Slowly, methodically. A lantern appeared, then another. The guards were checking the freight. Mallory closed his eyes. Willis tightened his grip on the edge of the wagon. Carter stared upward without blinking. The footsteps drew nearer, one wagon away, then directly beside them. A guard climbed onto the coal car immediately behind. His lantern swept across the load. He poked several sections with a long metal rod. Coal shifted. The lantern moved on. The footsteps approached again. Closer, closer. Then the guard climbed onto their wagon. The metal groaned beneath his weight. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The lantern beam appeared. Slowly, it swept across the coal. The guard muttered something to himself. The rod probed the surface. A few feet away. Then closer. Ashford could see the lantern light through gaps in the coal. The rod jabbed downward. 6 feet away. 5. 4. The guard paused. Ashford felt his pulse hammering. One more step. One more movement. And everything would be over. Then a whistle sounded somewhere across the yard. A sharp, urgent blast. The guard cursed. The rod withdrew immediately. A voice shouted from below. The guard responded. Several seconds later he climbed down. The footsteps retreated. Gone. For a long time the four men remained frozen, unable to believe their luck. At last, Mallory whispered, "Buy that man a drink if we ever meet him again." Nobody laughed. It had been too close. Far too close. The train remained stationary for another 20 minutes, then 30. The waiting became unbearable. Every passing minute increased the chance of discovery. Eventually, Ashford made a decision. "We get off." 3 faces turned toward him. "What?" Carter whispered. "We're too vulnerable." The others considered it. He was right. The train had become a trap. If another inspection occurred, their luck might not hold. Willis nodded first. Agreed. The others followed. The decision made, they waited. Patience mattered. Rushing would be fatal. At last, an opportunity appeared. A steam locomotive entered the yard from the opposite direction. Workers converged toward it immediately. Attention shifted. The moment arrived. One by one, the 4 men slipped from the wagon. Boots hit frozen ground. Nobody noticed. They moved immediately. Not running, not sneaking. Simply walking. Like railway workers heading somewhere important. The oldest disguise in the world. Confidence. They crossed 2 tracks, then 3. A guard glanced toward them. Ashford nodded politely. The guard nodded back and looked away. The simplicity of it felt astonishing. The 4 men reached a warehouse, passed behind it, then disappeared into a maze of freight cars. Only then did they stop. The yard stretched around them. Massive, confusing, dangerous. Yet they were free of the train, for now. Ashford unfolded the map. His fingers shook slightly from the cold. Willis pointed. "There!" A line ran west toward the mountains. Beyond those mountains lay the frontier, still distant, still dangerous, yet closer than it had ever been. The group prepared to move. Then Carter suddenly froze. His face had gone pale. What? He pointed toward the far side of the yard. A notice board stood near the station building. Several soldiers gathered around it. One of them held a newspaper. The front page displayed photographs. Photographs recently distributed across the region. Photographs of escaped prisoners. Even from this distance, Ashford recognized them. Their own faces. The Germans knew. Colditz had discovered the escape. The alarm had spread. The hunt had begun. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The reality settled heavily upon them. Until now, they had been fugitives in theory. Now they were fugitives in fact. Every railway station, every roadblock, every police office, every military post, all would soon know their names, their descriptions, their faces. Mallory broke the silence. Well, Ashford looked at him. Well, what? Mallory managed a tired smile. At least we know we're making progress. Despite everything, the others laughed. Briefly, quietly. The sort of laughter that appears when the alternative is fear. Then they shouldered their packs, adjusted their coats, and moved west, away from the rail yard, away from the trains, away from the growing search. The winter sun hung low over the horizon. The snow glittered beneath its pale light. Ahead lay forests, mountains, patrols, roadblocks, and somewhere beyond them all, freedom. Behind them, whistles began to sound across the yard. Someone had finally noticed something was wrong. The chase had truly begun, and the most dangerous part of the journey still lay ahead. Chapter 6. The Freight Train to Freedom. The chase had begun. Behind them, whistles sounded across the rail yard. At first there was only one, then another, then several more. Sharp blasts cut through the freezing morning air, echoing between warehouses and rows of freight wagons. Men shouted in German. Boots ran across frozen ground. Somewhere a bell began ringing with frantic insistence. Ashford did not look back. "Walk," he said quietly. Mallory glanced at him. "Walk. Running makes men watch." So they walked, 4 tired men in heavy coats, faces smeared with coal dust, moving through the confusion as though they belonged there. For a few precious seconds, the disguise held. Then a shout rose behind them, a different shout, sharper, directed. Ashford heard the word clearly. Gefangene. Prisoners. The spell broke. Now run. They ran, across the last track, around the corner of a timber shed, past stacked crates glazed white with frost. A guard shouted. Another answered. A rifle cracked somewhere behind them, and the sound tore through the air like splitting wood. The shot went wide. Snow burst from the wall beside Mallory's shoulder. "Good grief," he gasped. "They are taking this personally." No one answered. They plunged between 2 rows of freight cars and emerged on the far side of the yard. Ahead stood a low fence, half buried by snow. Willis reached it first, threw himself over, and landed heavily beyond it. Carter followed. Mallory went next, less gracefully. Ashford climbed last, tearing one glove on the wire. Another shot rang out. Closer this time. They dropped into a ditch beyond the fence and scrambled up the far bank into a line of winter trees. The forest swallowed them. For 10 minutes they ran without speaking. Branches whipped their faces. Snow filled their boots. Breath burned in their chests. Behind them, the rail yard noise gradually faded, though occasional shouts still reached them through the trees. At last, Carter stumbled. Ashford caught him by the arm. "Keep moving." "I am." "You stopped." "I was negotiating with my legs." Mallory seized Carter's other arm. "Tell them surrender is not an option." Together they dragged him onward until the trees thickened and the slope rose sharply. Only when they had climbed beyond sight of the valley did Ashford allow them to stop. They collapsed behind a fallen pine. For several minutes nobody spoke. Steam rose from their clothing. Their lungs worked painfully in the cold. Somewhere below, dogs began barking. Willis raised his head. "They'll bring patrols." Ashford nodded. "Roads first, villages, stations, and woods, eventually." Mallory wiped snow from his face. "Wonderful. A leisurely morning, then." Carter looked west through the trees. "What now?" Ashford pulled the map from inside his coat. The paper had softened with damp and was beginning to tear along the folds. He spread it carefully against the fallen trunk. Their position was uncertain, not disastrous, but uncertain. The junction lay behind them. Colditz lay far behind that. Ahead, the land rose toward darker country. Forests, ridges, smaller railway lines, and roads leading west. Willis pointed with a blackened finger. "There's another line here." Ashford followed it. A secondary freight route, thinner than the main line, bending through the hills before joining a larger track many miles further west. "Still operating?" Willis shrugged. "Maybe." Mallory leaned over the map. "Maybe is doing rather a lot of work today." Ashford studied the route. If the line was active, it might save them. If not, it would waste hours they did not have. Behind them, the dogs barked again. Closer. Ashford folded the map. "We try it." The next hours became a blur of snow, trees, and exhaustion. They avoided roads whenever possible. When they had to cross one, Willis went first, low and silent, then waved the others forward. Twice, they hid from passing vehicles. Once, a German staff car crawled along a nearby lane so slowly that all four men lay flat in a drainage ditch, while icy water soaked through their clothes. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened. Clouds gathered over the hills. Snow began falling again, at first lightly, then harder. For fugitives, it was both blessing and curse. Snow covered tracks. Snow concealed movement, but snow also stole strength. It blurred landmarks, numbed fingers, and turned every mile into punishment. Carter suffered most. His wet boot from the stream crossing had frozen stiff. He limped badly now, though he tried to hide it. Ashford noticed. So did Mallory. Neither mentioned it. Mentioning it would make it real. Near dusk, they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below, half hidden beneath drifting snow, lay a railway line. Single track, no station, no lights, no visible guards. For a moment all four simply stared. Then from far away came a sound, faint at first, then growing, a train whistle. Mallory closed his eyes. "I take back every unkind thing I have ever said about German railways." The sound grew louder. A glow appeared around the bend. Not bright, just a dull orange smudge through snow and steam. A locomotive was coming from the east, heading west. Ashford looked quickly along the track. There was no platform, no easy boarding point, no waiting wagons, only the line, the embankment, and the approaching train. Willis understood first. "We'll have to board it moving." Carter stared at him. That sounds like a phrase one says shortly before dying. The train emerged from the snowfall. It was moving slowly, laboring uphill under heavy load. Timber wagons followed the locomotive, stacked with dark logs and covered in places by tarpaulin. Behind them came several closed freight cars, slow enough perhaps, fast enough to kill a careless man. Ashford made the decision instantly. Timber wagon, third from the engine. It has a ladder. The men scrambled down the ridge toward the track. The locomotive thundered closer. Steam billowed into the snow. The ground trembled. Ashford reached the embankment first. The engine passed with a blast of heat and smoke so sudden that it nearly knocked him backwards. The first wagon clattered by, then the second. The third approached. The ladder flashed into view. Willis jumped. His hands caught the iron rail. For one terrible second his boots dragged through the snow beside the track. Then he hauled himself upward and vanished over the side. Carter was next. He hesitated. Only a fraction of a second, but long enough. The ladder began to pass. Ashford shoved him hard. Carter leapt, caught one rung with both hands, slammed against the side of the wagon, and cried out in pain. Mallory grabbed his coat from behind and pushed upward while Willis reached down from above. Together, they dragged him into the wagon. Mallory jumped next. He caught the lower rail, slipped, swore loudly, then managed to hook one arm through the ladder. Ashford ran beside him for 3 strides and shoved him up from below. Mallory disappeared over the side. Now Ashford was alone. The wagon was nearly past. He ran. Snow dragged at his boots. His torn glove slipped against the iron. For one sickening instant his hand failed to grip. Then he caught the final rung. His shoulder exploded with pain. His feet left the ground. The track rushed beneath him. Hands seized his coat. Willis and Mallory hauled him upward with desperate strength. He rolled into the wagon and landed hard among the timber. For several seconds he could not breathe. Then Mallory's face appeared above him. "Well," he said, panting, "that was undignified." Ashford laughed. He could not help it. The laugh came out weak and breathless, but it was real. The 4 men lay hidden between stacks of timber as the train climbed through the valley. Snow fell thickly around them. The tarpaulin above part of the load offered some shelter, though not much. Still, compared with the coal wagon, it felt almost comfortable. Almost. Carter examined his side. "Bruised," he said. "Broken." "No." "Good. Ask me again later." The train continued west. Night settled fully. The snowstorm deepened. For the first time since morning, pursuit seemed distant. Not gone, never gone, but distant. They allowed themselves small pieces of chocolate from Pembroke's packet. The chocolate was hard from cold, almost impossible to bite, and tasted faintly of coal dust. It was the finest thing any of them had ever eaten. Hours passed. No one slept properly. They dozed in fragments, waking whenever the train slowed, whenever voices sounded, whenever the brakes screamed around a curve. Sometime after midnight, the train stopped. Not gradually, suddenly. The jolt threw Mallory against Carter and nearly sent Willis into the logs. Ashford was awake at once. Voices outside, lanterns. boots crunching in snow. A checkpoint, of course. The final cruelty of every escape is that safety always seems nearest, just before danger returns. The men flattened themselves beneath the tarpaulin. Light moved along the train. One wagon inspected, then another. German voices, short, tired, irritable. Military police, perhaps. Ashford could not see them, but he could hear authority in the way they spoke. Railway workers sounded bored. These men sounded suspicious. The search moved closer. A lantern shone through the gap beneath the tarpaulin. The light crawled over timber, rope, snow, and the edge of Carter's boot. Ashford saw it. So did Carter. Slowly, painfully, Carter drew his foot back, a fraction of an inch, then another. The lantern stopped. Someone below spoke. A question. Another voice answered. Then boots climbed the side of the wagon. The wood shifted under weight. Mallory's eyes widened. The German stepped into the wagon. The tarpaulin lifted slightly as he moved. Cold air rushed in. Ashford could see the outline of the man's legs through a narrow fold in the canvas. The guard stood less than 3 feet away. He carried a rifle. He also carried a torch. The beam swept across the wagon. Once, twice. It paused near the place where the 4 men lay packed between logs. Ashford did not breathe. None of them breathed. The guard stepped closer. The logs creaked. Then, from somewhere near the locomotive, a shout rang out. Urgent. Angry. The guard turned his head. Another shout followed. The man cursed, lowered the torch, and climbed down from the wagon. The lantern light moved away. Still nobody breathed. Not until the whistle blew. Not until the train lurched forward. Not until the checkpoint vanished into the snow behind them. Only then did Mallory whisper, "I am beginning to suspect we are being kept alive purely for someone's amusement." Willis murmured, "Don't question it." The train rolled on, through snow, through darkness, through a countryside that none of them could see clearly. At some point in the deep hours before dawn, the rhythm of the train changed. The land began descending. The engine no longer strained. The wagons moved more smoothly. Ashford peered through a tear in the tarpaulin. Far ahead, through thinning snow, he saw lights. Not the scattered lights of a village, not a railway yard, a line of lights, a barrier, a crossing. Then he saw signs beside the track. He could not read them clearly, but he saw the guards. He saw the checkpoint buildings. He saw the border. Mallory saw it too. Is that... Ashford nodded once. Possibly. Possibly friendly. Possibly. That word again. The train slowed. Every muscle in Ashford's body tightened. If the train stopped, they might be searched again. If it was a German checkpoint, they might be finished. If the papers were demanded, they had none suitable for this. If soldiers climbed aboard. The train slowed further. Then, for reasons known only to railway men and Providence, it did not stop. It crawled through the checkpoint at walking pace. Lanterns passed. Figures moved beside the track. One man looked directly at their wagon. Ashford lowered his head. The wheels clanked over a set of points. A barrier passed behind them. Another followed. The train gathered speed. No shout came. No whistle. No gunfire. Only the steady rhythm of wheels on rails. For several minutes, no one dared speak. Then the snow began to lighten. Not the snowfall, the sky. A faint grey appeared beyond the hills. Dawn. The train emerged from a long cutting into open country. The land looked different now, softer somehow. The villages less dark, the roads quieter. Smoke rose from chimneys in the early light. Willis was the first to understand. He removed his cap slowly. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not wildly, just one quiet laugh, full of disbelief. "We're through." Carter stared at him. "Through?" Willis nodded. "Unless the Germans have started painting different signs for amusement." Mallory leaned back against the timber and covered his face with both hands. Good Lord. Ashford did not move at first. He simply looked out through the torn canvas at the pale winter morning. Fields rolled past. Snow lay upon hedgerows. A church bell rang somewhere far away. For the first time in years, there were no walls around him. No barbed wire. No watchtower. No command shouted from a courtyard. The train carried them west into morning. Only then did he reach inside his coat and remove the photograph. It was bent, damp, stained with coal dust, but still whole. His mother smiled from the garden gate. His father stood beside her, serious as ever. Ashford looked at it for a long time. Then he smiled. Mallory watched him quietly. Home. Ashford nodded. Home. None of them cheered. Not then. The moment was too large for noise. They sat together among the timber, 4 exhausted men in filthy clothes, bruised, frozen, hunted, and unbelievably alive. Behind them lay Colditz, the castle on the hill, the locked doors, the counts, the searchlights, the years stolen by war. Ahead lay uncertainty, interrogation perhaps, debriefing, hospitals, ships, letters, long journeys, and eventually, if fortune remained kind, England. But for now there was only the train, the dawn, the snow, and freedom. As the sun rose pale over the winter fields, Captain James Ashford leaned back against the timber, closed his eyes, and listened to the wheels upon the track. For once, the sound did not mean captivity. It meant movement. It meant distance. It meant life returning. And somewhere far behind them, high above a frozen town in Saxony, Colditz Castle stood silent in the snow, its walls still strong, its gates still locked, its guards still pacing. But 4 men were missing. And by the time anyone understood how truly far they had gone, the freight train was already carrying them beyond reach. The end.